Good afternoon. I'm going to give my Shabbat HaGadol sermon, my drasha, this way through a video, and it will be more of a schmooze than a formal sermon. The first idea I want to share is about Manishtana. Manishtana halayla hazeh, how is tonight different? And typically we call this the four questions, the Arba Kushiot. And the youngest child at the Seder, the youngest person at the Seder is supposed to ask the four questions. And when I was a young child, one of my teachers said, "What are the four questions?" I said, "The four questions, Shebechol haleilot anu ochlim chametz matzah, halayla hazeh kulo matzah, and all other nights we can eat matzah, we can eat bread. Tonight we just eat matzah." He said, "No, no, no, you have it all wrong. There's really just one question and four answers, or four examples. What is the one question? Manishtana halayla hazeh, how is tonight different? And we say, Shebechol haleilot anu ochlim, on all other nights we eat matzah, we eat bread, whatever we want to eat. On Pesach, we just eat matzah. That's an answer. It's an example of how tonight's different. And so we start the Seder by asking, well, how is tonight different? We give four examples of how tonight's different. And this year, of course, we can add to those examples of how this night is different than all other nights. One of the questions that I always wanted to ask is, and that I have asked before, is the song we sing, when we say, all that are hungry, let them come and eat. We sing the song in Aramaic, halachma, halachma, anyadi achalu. This is the poor bread, the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat. And the question I always want to ask, or we like to ask, is, it seems like an awkward time to be inviting people who are hungry to come and eat once we've all sat at the table. If we're inviting people to come to our Seder, we should invite them a week before Pesach, 2 weeks before Pesach, a month before Pesach. Why do we wait till we're sitting at the table and everyone's comfortable in their seats with their wine glasses to start inviting people to the Seder? And it's not a new question, it's an old question, and I want to share some of the answers from our tradition. The first answer is the answer of the Ritva, who wrote that inviting people to your meal, inviting those who are hungry to come and eat, is an expression of freedom. Slaves can't invite people. Slaves can't have guests. Slaves have nothing to share. The greatest expression of freedom we can have or we can make is to invite others to join us. That's number one. Number two is the opinion of Rav Yaakov Reisher, and he wrote that there used to be a tradition of not only opening the door for Eliyahu Hanavi at the end of the Seder, but some people would open their door at the beginning of the Seder just to show, hey, we're inviting everybody out on the street. If you're hungry, come and eat. Again, though, it's kind of late in the game to be inviting people to Pesach. So Reisher would say, we don't open our door, we keep the door closed, because the people we're trying to invite to the meal and into the conversation are the people who are already in our home. And how often is it that there are people in their home, parents, children, friends, spouse, whoever, who don't always feel comfortable or part of the conversation? Halach Ma'anya is saying, let's invite everybody around the table to be part of the experience. They're primary players in the Seder night. Number three is Rav Eliezer Ashkenazi, and he wrote that it's a form of lament. Now, why should inviting poor people to enjoy the meal, to partake in the meal, be a lament? What he writes is that in ancient times, in biblical times, in times when the temple stood, what did they do with the Korban Pesach? What did they do with the Paschal Lamb? It was shared. You put a group together called a Chabura, and the group together would enjoy the Paschal Lamb. There were not allowed to be leftovers. And so it's an expression of mourning to say, hey, we have extra food. It's not all going to be finished. There's no Paschal Lamb tonight or tomorrow. Come enjoy the food with us. And finally, the commentary of Tzvi Hirsch Ferber in a book called Kerem HaTzvi, he writes that there's a law in the Mishnah that says a poor person should not sit down for Passover until they're reclining. The word is ad sheyesev, from the expression kulanu misubim. We're supposed to lean back to express our freedom. And that same shoresh, the same root, is found in Exodus, where the Torah says, "Vayasev Elohim et ha'am." The Lord God led the Jews in a roundabout way, led the Jews out of Egypt in a roundabout way, and they saw the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, and it seemed as if the Egyptians were either going to kill them or take them back into slavery, meaning things did not look good during the Exodus. Yet God performs this great miracle and saves them. And that's what the Mishnah there is stressing, that a poor person may feel like reclining is pointless. How can a poor person relax and enjoy a Seder night if they have a lot of worries, if they don't know where their paycheck is going to come from or the next meal? And the answer is that on Seder night, the message is to look beyond the present and know that redemption may come at the blink of an eye. And that's the message of Kol Dichvin Yetei Ve'echol. We tell those who are needy to look beyond the present and come to eat. Kol Ditzrich Yetei Ve'yivsach. Those who are dealing with various crises should come and skip over Ve'yivsach, some of those worries, on Leil HaSeder, to look at the future. So that's my opening words. And today I want to share a little bit about a cultural phenomenon that I'm a huge fan of, and it's called DIY. There's even a TV station called DIY. DIY is do-it-yourself. And the do-it-yourself phenomenon, the do-it-yourself culture has been growing in the past couple decades, where with the information age and the internet and stores like Home Depot and Lowe's, and people are encouraged in learning how to do a lot of projects on their own that they would not ordinarily have been able to do. And I think some of you know that in rabbinical school, my closest friend Adam Shire and I, we studied mechanics. We took a mechanic program in, I think, Paramus, New Jersey. We became certified to do oil changes and tune-ups in cars. Now, I couldn't do one today. The cars have obviously progressed in the past 20 years, and I don't have the tools. But the idea was, how great would it feel to be able to do your own tune-up and do your own oil change? Once you go through the course, you realize it's not so practical to do an oil change, a tune-up on your own. It's better to take it to a place that can do it for you. But what is it with the DIY culture? Why do people do projects on their own? One possibility is that the project is cheaper. You can save money. Another possibility is the project can turn out nicer if you do it on your own. And I think the third and most compelling aspect of the DIY culture is sometimes it feels good. It feels good to put your own blood, sweat, and tears, your own creativity, your own effort into a project. And I'm going to talk about the Jewish approach to DIY in a moment, but I want to just, as an example, I have a neighbor. I'm not going to give away who the neighbor is, although this neighbor does have a daughter whose name begins with Yud or Y. And my neighbor is making a bed for his daughter. And he's not just making any bed, he's making a custom-made, high-quality, beautiful wooden bed with a loft and stairs and shelves, and probably nicer than any bed you could buy in any store. And I was helping him carry some wood into his house, and he had kind of admitted to me, hey, I think this bed's going to take longer than I thought. It's going to take a little more time than I thought, and it's going to be more expensive than a high-quality bed that you could buy in a store. But he still wanted to do it. He still fell for the DIY because there's something to be said for doing something yourself, and I definitely buy into it. So the mitzvah that we're going to talk about at the end today is the mitzvah to bake matzah. And in ancient times, and also not more than 150, 200 years ago, it was common for people, for communities, and for families to bake their own matzah for Pesach, and not just at any time, but on Erev Pesach Davka. On Erev Pesach, after the 6th hour, after the 5th hour, families would, or people would from a community, bake their own matzah. For our honeymoon, Danielle and I went to Italy, and we spent a few days in a place called Pitigliano, which is a beautiful, beautiful town. And if you take the tour of Pitigliano, there's a Jewish museum. And in the museum, they show you where the Jews of Pitigliano used to bake their own matzah, and they also made their wine. There's something very cool and impressive about people who bake their own matzah. And sure enough, in Halacha, the Shulchan Aruch talks about this minhag to make your own to bake your own matzah. Nohagin lalush matzah b'erev Pesach. Rav Kohen Tzadak Zal Katav. This is from the Rush, one of the commentaries on the Talmud. He wrote, "Latzei yidei chova b'layla rishona eina ela b'matzah she'afa Yisrael l'shem matzah shenemar u'shmartem et hamatzot." So to fulfill the obligation of eating matzah on Pesach night, the matzah has to be baked by somebody who understands what's going on, who's part of the whole story. Rav Hai Gaon Zal Zelashono Katav Matzah she'afa nochri lifnei Yisrael al yedei shimur k'tikuna muter liYisrael ochla, that a non-Jew can indeed bake the matzah for a Jewish person. Uva'alei ma'aseh v'chasidim v'hatmimim machmirin al atzmam kegeonim hamachmirim v'lashin ve'ofin be'atzman ke'ahid de'amrina ma darko shel ani hu masik v'ishto ofeh. That the Hasidim and the perfect ones and the strict ones would bake matzah for themselves. And how does this expression end? Ma kedarko shel ani hu mesik v'ishto ofeh. They would bake matzah for themselves like a poor man and his wife who would actually bake and knead and finish the bread alone. In other words, it's part of the DIY culture to do it for ourselves. It means more, but it's also the way a poor man would bake his own bread. He couldn't buy the bread made. He would bake it along with his wife. What more significant way to prepare the matzah for your Seder? I remember growing up, my parents had a book in our library. It's actually a 3-volume set. You could let me know if you have copies of the set, called the Jewish Catalog. It's extremely dated. I think it was inspired by the Reconstructionist movement of Judaism. And the idea was to really empower Jews to do Judaism by themselves. And I remember there's a section about making your own shofar. And you can buy the rough shofar. It's full of guk, and you put it in the bath, or you boil it for 5 hours, and you take the stuff out. And anything Jewish that the Jewish Catalog taught you how to do. And I found it just so empowering. We actually have a few copies in the shul, if anyone's interested. And it turns out that in Masechet Chulin, the Gemara talks about rabbis also being DIY, do-it-yourselfers. And I want to read a little bit of the Gemara for you. Rav Yehuda Amar, Amarav, Talmid Chacham tzarich shelimod gimel dvarim. A Talmid Chacham, a sage, should learn how to do 3 things. And unfortunately, I don't do any of these things. Ktav, Shchita, Umila. Ktav means to be a sofer. Shchita means to shecht animals. And Umila is circumcision. And then we have other opinions about what other rabbis should learn. You should learn how to tie tzitzit. You should learn how to know the halachot of all these other things. And the idea there is a rabbi should be able to do all these things on their own. But let's just talk about people who are not rabbis. There's Gemara in Masechet Kedushin that talks about betrothing, a man betrothing a woman. Ha'ish mekadesh bo uvishlucho, that a man can become engaged to a woman, can sanctify a woman, either by himself or with a messenger. Now, I don't know how romantic it would be to know who you want to marry and send a messenger to say, hey, he wants to marry you. That might not be the best strategy for the person you want to spend the rest of your lives with. But the Gemara asks an interesting question, and this is a typical Gemara question. Hashta bishlucho mekadesh bo miboy. Rav Yosef mitzvah b'yotem bishlucho. You know, the Mishnah needs to be there to teach that you can betroth a woman by means of a messenger. But why does the Mishnah have to say that you can become betrothed to a woman by yourself? We already know that. We know that a man can say, will you marry me? Why does the Mishnah have to remind us of that fact? And Yosef says, mitzvah bo yoter mi bishlucho. It's better to do it for yourself. Mitzvah bo yoter mi bishlucho. It's better to do it by yourself instead of by a messenger. And we see this idea in lots of areas of halacha. And I want to just do one more DIY example. And there's a Gemara actually there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim that talks about Friday mornings. Yashkim baboker b'yom shishi. A person should wake up early on Friday morning, lehachin tzorchei Shabbat, to get Shabbat ready. V'afilu yeshlo kama avadim l'sham sho. Even if you have lots of servants serving you, yishtadel lehachin ba'atzmo shum davar l'tzorchei Shabbat k'dei lechabdo. You should try to do something specific to prepare for Shabbat. Even if you could have it all taken care of, even if you could walk in the hotel and everything is all ready for you, you should really try to do something yourself. And we have examples. So Rav Chisda would cut vegetables finely. Rabba and Rav Yosef would chop wood for Shabbos to keep the family warm. Rav Zera would light the flame. I'm not sure how impressive that is, but that's what Rav Zera would do. And Rav Nachman would clean the house and replace the weekday cutlery with cutlery designed specially for Shabbat. And the idea of this halacha is to say, hey, we should become involved. We should be part of it. La'achin ba'atzmo. And Rav Gambiner, Rav Avram Abali Gambiner, who lived in the late 1600s, expanded on this, and he says, Hu adin b'chol mitzvah mitzvah bo yoter mi bishlucho. Every mitzvah, every act that we can do on our own by ourselves, it is preferred. Actually, there's something in the Zohar that talks about that the sweat that somebody gives off erev Shabbat, the zeyah mitzorchei Shabbat, heim skula lemechikat avonot kemo hadmaot, that you can use the sweat to wipe away the sins and all the things that you didn't mean to do. Let me skip a little bit and kind of cut to the punch. There's a let me give you one last thing before we cut to the punch, and that is that people like matzah, people hate matzah. It turns out that the matzah that our ancestors ate was probably soft, probably more like a thin pita bread. If anybody makes matzah at camp as part of Yom Yisrael, it's usually thin and soft and a little easier to work with, and not like the hard cracker matzot that we have. There was an article in the Jewish Week a few months ago about this couple in Rhode Island. I think that Dolinger is Rabbi Barry Dolinge, something to that effect. And he and his wife are baking this kosher certified matzah, but not the kind of matzah that comes in a box, but the kind of matzah that's wrapped and it is soft, and apparently is a lot more pleasurable to eat. The idea of the hard matzot that we ate came about when Jewish communities expanded, cities expanded, and people stopped doing it yourself. And the problem with the soft matzot is they would not last for very long. They didn't have much of a shelf life because matzah can't have any preservatives. And if they pre-produced the matzah before Pesach too much, it would become moldy and it was inedible. And if anybody's had a box of matzah on their shelf, you know that it can last for a couple years. It can last a long time. And so there was a need to bake this matzah, to bake it all the way till it was hard so that it would last. So that places like Kfar Chabad in Israel or the Lower East Side in New York could start baking matzot on Hanukkah time, and it could sit on a shelf all the way to Pesach. So it came as a need because people were not baking matzah on their own the way they did in Pitigliano or the way they do in very few communities today. Which brings us to this year. And this year, many of us are faced with the no choice but to do Pesach on our own, to kosher on our own, to figure out how to make stuff on our own, to lead a Seder on our own. And I know it's kind of daunting, and I just wanted to share a story that I heard from Y.Y. Jacobson, who's a well-known lecturer in the Frum lecture circuit on the East Coast. And Rabbi Jacobson actually grew up in Crown Heights on Montgomery Street, a few blocks away from the late Lubavitcher Rebbe. And there's an aspect of the Rebbe's life that he says is always overlooked, that he was incredibly down to earth, together with his wife, Chaya Mushka, of blessed memory. They lived a very simple life, and Rabbi Jacobson tells a lot of stories about the Rebbe when he speaks to audiences, but he told a different example that I wanted to share with you right now. And he said, the thing to keep in mind about the Rebbe's greatness was that the Lubavitcher Rebbe had no airs and graces at all, nor was he interested in pomp and ceremony that is often the hallmark of great Hasidic leaders and their courts. And he talks about this story. He says, for example, do you ever tell audiences that in their 60 years of marriage, the Rebbe and his wife ate every Shabbos meal together on their own? No guests on Friday night, no attendance, no public spectacle, just a married couple eating together, bringing the food in, eating, clearing the table, doing the washing up. A man who literally had tens of thousands of people at his beck and call. What a powerful lesson. And he says, but I've got a better story for you. A few weeks ago, I led a workshop for single mothers, and at the end of the session, I took questions from the women and encouraged them to ask anything that was on their mind. One of the ladies put her hand up, and this is what she asked me. It's a crazy story, says Rabbi Jacobson. A few months ago, it was Pesach. The thing is, my ex-husband and I went through a difficult breakup. After years in court over our kids, we finally settled on a shared custody arrangement, which means that we alternate Jewish holidays. This Pesach, it was my turn. My children were coming home for the Seder, and I was so excited. I changed my home for Pesach and prepared everything beautifully. It was going to be just me and the kids. I was so happy about them being with me that I told everyone, my family, my friends, my neighbors. Then 1 hour before Yom Tov, I got a call from my ex. For some reason, the kids were not coming home. I almost fainted from shock and heartache. I was also so ashamed. I guess I could have called my parents. I could have called my neighbors and gone to them for the Seder. But how could I actually do that? I had told everyone my kids were coming home for Pesach. Truth is, I didn't have the energy to even be with anyone. I felt completely and utterly numb, dry and lifeless. So I did the Seder by myself, on my own. It was the worst and most bitter Seder I ever had. I just sat there crying the whole way through, weeping. It wasn't Pesach. It was more like Tisha B'Av. I did not have to eat maror. My entire life was maror. Yes, I went through the Haggadah and ate the matzah, but the entire Seder took me 25 minutes. Rabbi Jacobson, did I do the right thing? Did I fulfill my Seder obligation? Was it even called a Seder? Because it did not feel like a proper Pesach. And that's what this woman said. Rabbi Jacobson told me, and believe me, as a public speaker, I know what he means. Sometimes your most inspirational moments, you're not prepared for. They're a gift from God. You can prepare for hours, and then inspiration drops into your lap. And that was the moment for Rabbi Jacobson, where he said, "Lady, in 1988, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife died, and he was left on his own, as they sadly had no kids. She passed away in February, and 2 months later it was Pesach. Every year the Rebbe and Rebbitzin had Seder together. But this year he was on his own, totally by himself. Who could the Rebbe conduct the Pesach Seder with? I recall that a young boy approached the Rebbe after Mariv on the first night of Pesach, and on behalf of his mother invited the Rebbe to his home for Seder. His family, Ari's family, lived at 706 Eastern Parkway, just 1 block from 770. The Rebbe smiled at Ari, and then he shook his head. He thanked him profusely, but told Ari he'd be having the Seder in his private office at 770. I was a yeshiva student at the time, continues Rabbi Jacobson, so I'm a first-hand witness to this story. In fact, the Rebbe's long-standing assistant, Reb Label Groner, offered to stay with the Rebbe, but the Rebbe sent him home to have Seder with his family. And so the great Lubavitcher Rebbe, the man who inspired countless people around the world, who personally undertook to provide a meaningful Pesach Seder for Israeli army personnel who were on duty on the first night of Pesach via his shluchim, had the Seder on his own. Not one person was present. As the Talmud says, if you were on your own, you should ask yourself the 4 questions, man ishtana, and then you should answer the questions yourself. A few of us yeshiva boys did not go home that night. We waited outside in the street, and after a couple of hours, the Rebbe opened the door to welcome Eliyahu Hanavi and recite Shvoch Chamorcha. He walked outside holding a candle in his Haggadah, said the prayer, gave us a wave, and then went back inside to finish the Seder by himself. My dear lady, said Rabbi Jacobson, if it was good enough for the Lubavitcher Rebbe to have the Seder on his own, trust me, your Seder was perfect. He could have had his Seder with 100 people, 1,000 people, or 10,000 people. He personally arranged for all the army Seders in Israel to be sponsored. He was responsible for hundreds of thousands of people celebrating Pesach on Seder night from Kathmandu to Alaska, from San Francisco to New Zealand. But at the end of the day, he went and did Seder on his own. He didn't need anyone else to be close to God. He didn't need adulation. He didn't need validation. He sat alone and relived Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt. I was only 15 at the time, concludes Rabbi Jacobson, but despite my youth, I felt sad that the Rebbe had nobody to be with for Pesach. Why did he not invite just one person to be with him? But today, after hearing your story, I discovered my answer, and it's just a personal feeling. As a true Jewish leader, he concludes, the Rebbe wished to empower all those souls who would ever need to do their Seder alone. He wanted them to know that their solitary Pesach Seder was powerful, meaningful, and real. Jewish history and the divine presence who dwell at their Seder just as it does at the Seder of so many people here. And I think that could be the message for our Pesach. It's the DIY message, the idea that if we can do it ourselves, how great is that? How amazing is it? And this does not just apply to the Seder night, it applies to all of Pesach, it applies to Shabbat. And in closing, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch wrote 100 years ago some prophetic words that if one day synagogues were to close down, if they shut down shuls across the world, he wrote, Yiddishkeit would persevere, Judaism would be alive, it would stay. However, if they cut out the mitzvot, the stuff we do in our homes, the holidays, the kosher, the Torah study, Judaism would die. And thankfully, we're in the former case and not the latter case. The shuls are closed, our community gatherings are closed, but we persevere, we succeed, we celebrate. And this can be our DIY Pesach. It can be our Pesach to never forget. This will be our Pesach to celebrate in our own special way, our own special, unique way. And we look forward to being together one day soon. Chag Sameach.